The lawyer's voice was very quiet when he read my father's will. I remember noticing that detail. How measured he was. How careful. Like a man who had done this many times. And understood that the words he was about to say would rearrange someone's life. The office smelled like old paper and central air conditioning. My mother sat to my left in a gray blazer she had bought specifically for that day. My younger brother Ryan sat beside her, and even before the lawyer had read a single line, Ryan was already leaning back in his chair with the particular ease of a man who already knows how a story ends. I did not have that ease. I was sitting forward with my hands folded in my lap, the way I had sat at every important meeting of my adult life, attentive, prepared, ready to absorb whatever came next. What came next was this. The house went to Ryan. My father's savings account went to Ryan, his investment portfolio, the car, the personal property, all of it, to Ryan. My name appeared exactly once in the entire document. I received $1. The lawyer read it without inflection, the way you read a line that you have already decided not to editorialize on. My mother reached over and touched Ryan's arm. Ryan didn't laugh out loud. He wasn't that obvious about it. But there was something in the way he exhaled, slow, satisfied. Like a man setting down something heavy he had been carrying for a long time. That was worse than laughter. And my mother looked at me across that office and said, in a voice that was almost gentle, "Your father knew who deserved it." I drove home in silence. I sat in my car in the parking garage of my apartment building for 20 minutes without moving. And I thought about 11 years of hospital visits, and medical appointments and 3 a.m. phone calls, and canceled. Vacations and the promotion I had turned down because my father's first diagnosis had come the same week, and I hadn't been able to make myself leave the city. I thought about all of it. And then 2 days later, my father's lawyer called. He said, "Emily, there is one more document. I need you to come in alone." My name is Emily Carter. I'm 34 years old. I work as a project manager at a mid-sized logistics company in Columbus, Ohio, which means I spend my professional life making sure that complicated things happen in the right order, that details don't fall through the cracks, and that when something goes wrong, and something always goes wrong, there is a plan already in place for it. I tell you that because it matters. The way we work is often just the way we are. My parents were Richard and Diane Carter. My father was a civil engineer who had built a quiet, comfortable life through 40 years of careful work. He was not a wealthy man by any dramatic definition, but he had been disciplined. The rental properties, the investment account he had been adding to since before I was born, the house that was paid off by the time I was in high school. He believed in building things slowly and maintaining them well. He was, in almost every way, the opposite of my brother. Ryan is 4 years younger than me. He is the kind of person who has always moved through life with the unshakable conviction that things will simply work out, for him. Not because he is prepared for them, but because they always have. My parents, particularly my mother, had made sure of that. Ryan had been the easier child in the way that charming, uncomplicated children are easy. He laughed at my father's jokes. He remembered to hug my mother when he arrived. He said the right things at the right times. He had a talent for being present in moments that mattered visibly, and absent in moments that mattered practically. When my father was first diagnosed with heart disease 6 years ago, Ryan drove up from Cincinnati for the weekend, sat at the kitchen table looking appropriately concerned, and then drove back on Sunday because he had something on Monday morning. What he had on Monday morning, I later learned, was nothing in particular. I stayed not because I was asked to, or because I was the oldest, or because I had made any formal decision about it. I stayed because my father looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. And my mother, whatever her faults, was genuinely frightened, and there was simply no one else. Over the next 6 years, I became the architecture of my parents' daily life. I managed my father's medications and coordinated with his cardiologist. I drove him to appointments when my mother's anxiety made her too unreliable behind the wheel. Handled the rental properties when he no longer had the energy, the maintenance calls, the lease renewals, the tenant disputes, the accounting. I did all of this while working full-time, and I did most of it without being asked, because I had looked at the situation and understood what was needed. Ryan visited at Christmas and occasionally in summer. He called on birthdays. He borrowed money 3 times over those 6 years. Once for a security deposit on a new apartment. Once for what he described as a business opportunity. And once for reasons that were never fully explained to me, but that my mother approved without hesitation. None of it was repaid. My mother loved Ryan differently than she loved me. I understood that when I was still young enough that it should have hurt more than it did. He was lighter somehow. Easier to love in the loud, obvious ways that families celebrate. I was capable and reliable and practical, which are qualities that earn respect and very rarely earn warmth. I had made my peace with that, or I thought I had. What I had not anticipated was the will. My father died on a Tuesday in March. He had been declining for 4 months by then, slowly, and then very quickly, the way that illness works when it has finally decided. I was with him when it happened. Ryan arrived 8 hours later. The funeral was on a Friday. I organized it because that is what I do. And because my mother was in no state to make decisions, and Ryan's version of helping was to stand near the arrangements I had made and receive condolences on behalf of the family. The will reading was scheduled for the following Monday, at the office of my father's attorney, a man named Gerald Harmon, who had handled my parents' legal affairs for over 20 years. I arrived 5 minutes early. Ryan arrived with my mother, and the 2 of them came in together in a way that already felt like a unit closed, slightly turned toward each other, the body language of people who are sharing a secret in a room full of people who don't know it yet. I noticed that I filed it away. Gerald Harmon read the will in the careful, neutral voice I described at the beginning of this story. And as he read, I watched my brother's face go through the quiet performance of someone pretending to hear news he is actually confirming. There was no surprise in him. The surprise had already happened somewhere else, in some other conversation, in some room I had not been in. When my name was read, $1 to my daughter Emily, with love, my mother's expression did not change. She had the stillness of someone who had been prepared. Ryan drove my mother home from the lawyer's office. As they left, I heard him say something about calling a real estate agent. He said it at a volume that was designed to be overheard. I sat in the parking lot of Gerald Harmon's office for a long time. I called my closest friend, Margot, and I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Emily, something is wrong. Your father wouldn't do that." I wanted to believe her. I wasn't sure I could. The call came 48 hours later. I was at work, or trying to be at work, which mostly meant sitting at my desk looking at a spreadsheet without processing any of it. My phone showed Gerald Harmon's office number, and something in my chest shifted when I saw it. Not hope exactly, because I was too tired for hope, but something adjacent to it. He was brief and careful on the phone. He said there was an additional document connected to my father's estate that had not been part of the will reading. He said it had specific instructions governing when and how it could be presented. He said those conditions had now been met. I asked him what conditions. He said he would explain everything in person. He asked if I could come to his office the following morning. He asked specifically that I come alone and that I not mention the call to any other family members. I said yes to all of it. I went home that evening and I made dinner, and I sat at my kitchen table for a long time in the quiet. I thought about my father, not the father of the last few years, frail and diminished and sleeping in a hospital bed in the living room, but the father from before, the man who had taught me to read a balance sheet when I was 12 because he said financial literacy was not optional for women, the man who had sat with me at this same kind of kitchen table years ago and said, "Emily, you always see the whole board. Most people only look at where they are standing." I thought about that. I thought about it for a long time. Gerald Harmon's office looked exactly the same as it had 2 days before. Same old paper smell, same neutral carpeting, same framed diplomas on the wall behind his desk. But this time, it was just the 2 of us. He set a sealed envelope on the desk between us. It was a standard legal envelope, cream-colored, sealed with wax that had been stamped with my father's signet ring. A small thing he had worn for as long as I could remember. A quiet family tradition that I had always found quietly moving. On the front, in my father's handwriting, careful, slightly slanted, the handwriting of an engineer, were these words: "To be opened only if Emily receives less than 10% of the estate as described in the primary will." I looked at that envelope for a moment without speaking. Gerald said, "Your father left this with me approximately 14 months ago. He was very specific about the conditions. He told me that if those conditions were not triggered, if the primary will distributed the estate fairly, this envelope was to be destroyed unopened. But if they were triggered," he paused. "Well, they were." I asked him if he knew what was inside. He said, "I know the outline. Your father walked me through it when he created the documents. But he wanted you to read his letter first, in his own words." He handed me a letter opener. I broke the wax seal. The letter was 3 pages, handwritten, dated 14 months before his death. I am not going to read you every word of it. Some of it belongs only to me, but I will tell you what it said because it is the part of this story that I think about most often, even now. My father wrote that he had discovered approximately 18 months before his death that my mother had been quietly redirecting household finances for several years. Not dramatically, nothing that would have shown up easily in a casual review. Small transfers, gradual shifts. The slow movement of shared assets into accounts that were effectively controlled by my mother alone. Accounts that my brother had access to, and I did not. He had not confronted my mother. He wrote that he had considered it, and decided against it, for reasons that were complicated and that I think I understand even if I cannot fully explain them. They had been married for 38 years. He was already ill. He did not want to spend whatever time he had left in open warfare with the woman he had built his life with. But he also could not allow what he had seen to simply continue unchallenged. He had discovered it almost by accident, during a period when I was handling the rental property accounts, and had asked him about a discrepancy in the numbers. He wrote about Ryan. He wrote about it with the particular sadness of a parent who has had to revise his understanding of his own child. He wrote that Ryan had not become the person he had hoped, and that my mother's protection of him had made him worse rather than better, and that he had watched this happen over many years and had not intervened enough and was sorry for it. He wrote about me. He said, "You have always done the right thing because it was the right thing, not because anyone was watching. I hope you know that I was watching. I want you to know that I saw," and then he wrote the line that I had been, without knowing it, waiting my entire life to read. He said, "If you are reading this, they did exactly what I feared. And that means that everything I prepared for you is now legally yours." What my father had prepared, Gerald Harmon explained over the next hour, was an irrevocable trust. He had created it quietly 22 months before his death, during a period when his health had temporarily stabilized. He had funded it separately from the primary estate, drawing from accounts that were in his name alone. Accounts that my mother did not have direct visibility into. Accounts that had never appeared in any of the family financial discussions that Ryan participated in. The trust contained the following: 3 rental properties in the Columbus area, each of them fully paid off, generating steady monthly income. An investment account he had been building for over a decade, separate from the joint portfolio, and a cash reserve that he had accumulated slowly and deliberately over the last years of his life. The total value was approximately $1.8 million. I sat very still while Gerald told me this. I am not someone who cries easily in professional settings, or really in any settings, but I felt something shift in my chest that I did not fully have words for. It was not triumph. It was not even relief. Exactly. It was something more like grief, mixed with gratitude. The feeling of being known by someone after they are no longer there to tell you. Gerald said, "The trust is structured so that neither the primary will nor any external legal challenge can access it. Your father was very thorough. Every document was witnessed. Every step was recorded. He anticipated that there might be a challenge." I said he knew Ryan would sue. Gerald said quietly, "He prepared for it." I did not call my mother or Ryan after that meeting. I went home, I made tea, and I sat with my father's letter for a long time. They found out 3 days later, when Gerald Harmon formally notified them of the trust as required by law. Ryan called me 4 times that afternoon. I let all 4 calls go to voicemail. The messages progressed in a way that was, even under the circumstances, almost textbook. The first was confused, asking me to call him back. The second was conciliatory, saying that he was sure there had been some kind of misunderstanding and that family should handle things together. The third had an edge to it. The fourth was my mother's voice, not Ryan's, very calm and very cold, telling me that my father had clearly not been of sound mind and that she intended to speak to an attorney. Over the following 2 weeks, the extended family became involved. Cousins I had not spoken to in years called to tell me I was being selfish. A woman from my parents' church who had known our family for decades sent me a long email about forgiveness and the importance of honoring parents. Ryan's wife Karen, whom I had always gotten along with reasonably well, left me a voicemail telling me that Ryan was devastated and that I should think about what my father would have wanted. I found that last one almost interesting. What my father had wanted was written in his own handwriting, sealed with his own ring, and locked in a legal document that had been prepared by a man who had known him for 20 years. What my father had wanted was not a mystery. I responded to none of it. Ryan filed suit 6 weeks after the trust was activated. His attorney's argument was built on 3 claims: that my father had been unduly influenced in creating the trust, that the trust documents contained irregularities, suggesting manipulation, and that my father's cognitive decline had made him incapable of sound legal judgment at the time of execution. I will tell you what those claims ran into. They ran into the fact that my father had executed the trust 22 months before his death, during a period when 2 separate physicians had documented him as cognitively intact. They ran into the fact that every document had been witnessed by 2 independent parties with no familial connection to anyone in the estate. They ran into the fact that Gerald Harmon, who had known my father for 2 decades, had contemporaneous notes of every meeting, every instruction, and every decision my father had made in the process. And they ran into one final thing that I had not known about until Gerald told me during the litigation preparation. My father had recorded a video. 3 weeks before he executed the trust, he had sat in Gerald's office, healthy enough at that point to be clear-headed and articulate, and recorded a 20-minute video statement. In it, he explained his decisions. He explained what he had discovered. He explained his reasons. He explained exactly why he had structured things the way he had. He looked directly at the camera and said, in the measured voice of a man who had thought carefully about every word, that he was of sound mind, that he had not been influenced by anyone, and that he was making these decisions freely and with full understanding of their consequences. Gerald told me that when Ryan's attorney was shown the video during discovery, the attorney had requested a brief recess. The case did not go to trial. The lawsuit was withdrawn for months after it was filed. There was no dramatic courtroom moment. There was no climactic confrontation. There was a legal process that concluded in the way that well-prepared legal processes usually conclude when one side has documentation and the other side has grievance. My mother did not speak to me for 8 months after the withdrawal. When she did finally call, she did not apologize. She said that she wanted to have a relationship with me and that she hoped we could move forward. I listened to her, and I told her that I needed more time, and I meant it. Ryan lost the legal fees, which were substantial. He and Karen sold their house the following year, though I have no way of knowing whether that was directly connected to the lawsuit costs or to other circumstances. I did not follow it closely. I found that I had very little interest in the details of Ryan's difficulties once the legal matter was resolved. What I was interested in was my own life. With the trust income from the rental properties, I had financial stability for the first time in my adult life. Real stability. Not the managed carefully kind I had been maintaining for years, but the kind that allows you to make decisions from a place of groundedness rather than pressure. I took the promotion I had passed up 6 years earlier. I bought a small house in a neighborhood I had always liked, with a garden in the back that I have absolutely no skills with, but am learning. I framed my father's letter. It hangs in my home office, which I think he would have found slightly sentimental, and which I find I do not mind at all. People ask me sometimes whether I am angry. The honest answer is that I was angry for a while. Not the sharp, hot kind, but the dull, exhausting kind that comes from realizing that people you loved had been willing to treat you as though you didn't matter. That takes time to work through. I am not going to pretend otherwise. But anger was never where the story ended for me. What I think about when I think about all of it clearly is my father in Gerald Harmon's office 22 months before he died, sitting in front of a camera, making sure that I would be taken care of, even if he was not there to do it himself. I think about him going through every document, every signature, every procedural step, with the same quiet thoroughness he had brought to 40 years of engineering. I think about him knowing what would happen after he was gone, knowing his wife, knowing his son, understanding exactly what they would do, and deciding not to simply accept it. He didn't fight them openly. He didn't accuse anyone. He didn't create a scene. He built something that would outlast the problem. My mother and Ryan spent years believing that they had understood my father. They had read him as a man who could be managed, who could be maneuvered, who could be surrounded by the right influences and steered toward the right outcomes. What they had missed, what they had always missed, was how much he saw. He was quiet in the way that observant people are often quiet. He was watching, he was thinking, he was building. The dollar they gave me in the will was not an accident, and it was not a cruelty. My father put it there deliberately because he understood something about the people he was dealing with. He understood that they needed to believe they had one. That certainty, that satisfied, smiling, leaning back in new chair certainty, was exactly what made them stop paying attention. He needed them to stop paying attention. They thought they had written me out of the future. They thought they had reduced me to a single dollar and a line that my mother could recite with something close to satisfaction. What they didn't know, what they never knew, was that my father had already written me into everything that mattered. The house, the letter, the trust, the future. All of it already mine. He just needed them to open the wrong envelope first.